Our show wouldn't exist without you listening. But if you want more information on how to become a guest, how to recommend a guest, or just to stay in touch, go to flippingthelid.com. We'll see you there. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back for another episode of Flipping the Lid. You know what we do here. We dive in deep. We jump in and unpack the stories that have shaped some of the most significant and successful people making impact on. I was introduced to this, I can't even describe just this dynamic force of an energy that has such powerful beauty on an integrated feminine and masculine approach to the world. I was introduced by one of my very good friends, George Bryant. Though most times I don't get context on those intros, they always land. The second I met this woman, there was connection. There was depth. It was clear the level of empathy that she just exists in every moment with, and her intuition flowed by our ability to be able to have a discussion that felt like we had known each other, been talking for hours, and I think was only 20 minutes. This woman literally is reshaping the way that women are supporting men in a high-performance level and really taking the traditional high-performing men and unlocking them to the next level by helping them really do a lot of things similar to how we do. See inside, take out the trash from their past, and become all of what they're capable of becoming. This woman's a force, and I cannot wait for you to get to know her. Dominey, thank you for being with us.
Fuck, man, are we done? Because that was enough. Like, I feel like I just got so much from that fucking intro that I'm like, I just have something in my eye. It's not, just, everything's fine. I'm fucking tough, man. Sniff. Thank you, my love. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for honoring me with your time and space on your platform. That's truly a sacred thing.
Well, here's the thing. I always have time, space, energy, and capacity to invest in those that are creating impact in the world, who pour into others, who show up, and who've actually done the work to put themselves in a position where they are so aware, so centered in who they are that they can acknowledge they aren't where they want to be, where they can be, but they are where they are now, and they're living that existence. And I feel like that's how I have experienced you in such a raw way. And you and I both know how unique, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we don't meet people often, and it's just depth, instinct. And I felt that with you. And so that's how I view you, my friend. But I'd love for you to tell us who you are in your words.
So there's a story, there's a book of stories. It's called Mostly True Stories by Brian Andreas. And there's one that goes like this. "Are you a princess?" I asked. And she said, "I'm much more than a princess, but you don't have a word for it yet here on Earth." And they're all just like that. They're just a couple of sentences, each one. And it's one of the most extraordinary little books I think I've ever read. And each story, just like, there's something magical, something that feels like it unfolds. That made me think of it when you're like, I'm not sure what she is. It's like, well, there isn't quite a word for it yet here on Earth. But I started out just as a regular human. And now I'm actually really a regular human without all the trash. Turns out regular humans are just like me, which I just think is yes. My favorite thing about who I am now is that there's nothing special about me whatsoever. I am the result of what happens when you keep going and going and going, taking out the trash, taking out the trash, taking out the trash. And I used to have all of the trash. I used to just be like existing underneath, just like in a dumpster all the time. And my neural pathways were in the dumpster. My programming was in the dumpster. My physical body. And I started quite young. I had an awakening experience when I was about 14, which I'm actually not sure if you and I have actually spoken about.
We haven't, but I was going to ask you about it today because I did at least see that piece. So if you want to go there now, jump right in.
I did. Have you ever read the book Conversations with God? So it was during that book. Now, I did not grow up religious. My parents in the 60s and 70s were hippies. They did the EST training, which is very much sort of it's what you and I teach now, basically. And so there was no church or anything like that. But I still thought that, God was up there, and it was definitely a dude, and he definitely had white hair. And it never had occurred to me. I mean, just to question that never occurred to me. And I read something in that book, in the Conversations with God book, and I remember exactly where I was sitting on the back porch of my mom's farm, overlooking this, the hills and everything behind me. And suddenly I realized it was like waking up from a dream. I just realized that life wasn't quite what it appeared to be. It's just not quite that thing. Suddenly, and what I realize now is I stepped out of my current template, my current paradigm. And that was really all it was. It was just like, but it was like a remembering. It was like, oh. And it was like, then there were cracks. There were just little cracks that I would see for the next 3 years. In fact, I went back a few years ago and found like a journal I'd written when I was like 14, 15, 16. And
capsules, those are incredible.
It was incredible. It was just incredible. And it's like the facade is cracking. I mean, that's the type of thing I would write when I was fucking 15 years old, And so I continued on. I was struggling a lot at that time. I think honestly, probably that realization contributed to more isolation than anything else. But I was deeply depressed, suicidal, anxious, controlling, deeply like a people pleaser. Couldn't say no, no boundaries, overweight. And when I was 19, I was trying all these things, medication, et cetera, to fix all these things. And I went to this weekend workshop, and I transformed more in one weekend than I thought humanly possible.
Oh, yeah.
And I dove in at that point. I was like, oh, I would like more of this shit, please. Except I didn't swear at the time, so I was too scared. I didn't start swearing until like my mid-20s. It's all coming out today. I don't even think I've ever talked about any of that, but that's all true. And so I dove in. I went to that modality was called Pathwork. It is brilliant, but not very well known. I studied there at their school for 4 or 5 years. And then I went to a 4-year intensive energy healing school. And I studied there. And then I got a master's degree. And I just kept going. I just kept peeling back layer after layer after layer. Because as I did, things just got better and better and better. And it was slow and sludge filled for quite some time. And then after many years, suddenly it's like I just rose. I could finally rise because I was letting go of the concrete weights that were chained to my feet, that I had chained and was continuing to hold chained to my feet. And finally, gradually chipped away at them, and then finally just broke the chain. And I elevated into a state of semi-enlightenment of some kind. I don't exactly know how those upper realms worked exactly, but for a period of about 1.5 years, I was in this state of enlightenment where everything was bliss and ease and joy. And I remember I was living in North Carolina and I turned down a road and it was like my heart just filled. I was like, this is the best road. Like it was just the most authentic thing. It was like, I was so excited to see that street. It was like it was just, everything just radiated with perfection. It's like the experience of being in love. I think I must have just been like flooded with oxytocin, but I was just creating my own instead of having it generated by somebody else, which is, I want to do so many research projects.
Which, by the way, we're all capable of. And that's just so, right? So Dominey, like, okay, dude. Anybody who knows me knows I'm not often at a lack for words. You lay so much wisdom into that answer on who you are. And I'd love to actually unpack some specific things that stuck out at me because it's beautiful. And one of them is simply going to be a reflection, and some of them are going to be some questions because you've done the work, you clearly have depth, and you're deeply connected with yourself, which allows you to deeply connect with others.
Agreed. And
you are literally moving people in massive ways in short time frames that they don't believe is possible, right?
Yes, that's my favorite.
By the way, that's like literally like why we created our challenge and the app that we did, because it's like people are literally transforming their lives in less than 10 minutes a day in a 7-day investment because of the way that they're guided and framed. It's nuts. But like people don't believe what's possible because they don't know even how to access the path. Right? But you said something really big in the beginning that I just have to honor. And it was a quote that you said that I can't even remember the words on, but it was about, it's so much more than a princess. And that hits me really deeply as a father of a daughter, because that's something that my wife and I have always been very, very intimately aware of, is the paradigms of language and how they embed and actually embody identities in certain people, even though they aren't real identities. They're perceived, they're believed, they're right. The narratives that you and I help people unpack intellectually and emotionally.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's really interesting because there's just so much depth in that, because my wife and I, our daughter is radiant. She's a redhead, blue-eyed little unicorn. This girl has like more natural emotional intelligence and empath and intuitive abilities than I've met in almost any adult human capacity. Like, she is lookout world, like, right? But legitimately, what would happen? Gosh, she's so pretty. Gosh, she's so cute. Oh my gosh, she's so beautiful. Oh my gosh, she's right. And from early on, it was actually interesting. And I have to give a lot of respect to my parents and those of us that are around, because they picked up on our little cues. Because every time someone would say that, I'd say, and she's smart, and she's strong, and she's capable, and she's kind. And like, we just really started embodying and embedding different intentional language in a place, because we believed our kids needed to know who they were, love who they were, and be able to advocate for who they were. Because if they could do those three things, they could do it for anything. Right? And that's just been our belief system. And by the way, I fucked up a lot of it as a dad. But you talked about something that I told you I listened to my first episode today with my wife this morning.
Yes. Right? It sounds incredible.
And you said something in the very beginning part of something that really was a deep part of a conversation that we had, which is these paths, these beliefs, these systems and approaches that we just never even question. Like, my wife and I never even questioned whether or not getting married to somebody was an option. We never even questioned whether or not kids was an option. We just assumed that's what we were going to do. Right? And so many of these paradigms, and you talked about that so beautifully, and the awareness in that as early as 14, to be able to start to understand that your world all of a sudden is shifting based on your perception of what it was.
Yeah.
You unpacked so much in where that took you, but I want to take you back to that moment. That moment when all of a sudden you're existing in that space. And all of a sudden, your entire paradigm shifts. What were you feeling? What were you experiencing? Give us physiological components. Give us detail, because that type of awareness and transformation is accessible to everyone. But so many people don't know how to access it. And fortunately, some of us learn how to do it in natural ways, like you did so early. So could you unpack that? Because there's so much in that process.
Very much. Very much. It was one of those moments where, because a lot of what we teach, you know, the mastery in what you and I teach is that we're able to induce this process. In that moment, it wasn't induced. I wasn't seeking help. It wasn't with a therapist. It was what we call grace.
There.
Sometimes shit just works.
Yeah.
And there's a balance, as you and I know, and as our clients eventually learn, between you, meaning your human will, what you want, your agenda, your Eunice, versus versus the apparent separation between you and the environment. The environment being, does life help you? Does it seem to work against you? God, if that's in your wheelhouse. Source, if it's not. And that is the grace. And life, the ideal human life, is a balance between the two. You are receiving from the universe, you're contributing, you're fulfilling who you are, but you're not attached to it, right? There's a couple tricks to it, folks. It's actually really not that hard. I don't mean that dismissively. I just mean like it's super really
so I agree with you, but that's why I want you to describe it, because your words simplify it in a way that people can access it and believe that something's possible in a way that before hearing your words didn't exist.
Yes.
So that's what I want you to show, is the simplicity of it and what you experienced through it.
Yeah, it was very simple. I remember I was sitting on the back porch, as I said. It was a sunny day. It was about mid-afternoon. I was homeschooled, so this was part of like my schoolwork.
Okay.
My mother was clever. And so I sat here. I was in the sunshine. I'm overlooking, 50 acres, pond, rolling hills, and I'm reading this book, and it was something about one of the things it mentioned that I remember having a transformation around was around sex, actually, which was not something that I was ever interested in or ever talked about. It was very taboo in my family. And it said something about the book is this man writing to God and God writing back. And so the man writes to God and he says, what about sex? That's bad, right? Or premarital sex is bad, right? And God says, I made sex fun. Why would I make something fun if it was forbidden? And the way the statement was shaped made me go, oh, yeah, because that indicates a kind of sadism, which contradicts my beliefs about what God was. And so there was this way in which the information came in. It contradicted what I didn't even realize I held. So the assumption, you guys assumed you had to get married, assumed you had kids. That means that you were on autopilot in those areas of your life, right? I was on autopilot when it came to the assumption about God. I just thought that that's just what it is, right? And so that's a way that you can look, and the listener listening now can look and see, are there things that you haven't questioned that you've always just assumed to be true, and thus you assume everybody else assumes to be true? And in that way, you can literally see what you're not conscious of.
Really?
And become conscious of it. A problem cannot be solved in the human system without you being conscious of it.
It's a fact.
Right? By definition, or we can't solve it anyway.
Yeah.
Right?
And be conscious of what you're unaware of. It's just a fact.
It's just a fact. That's just how the human system works. So I felt that contradiction come in, and it's as if I remembered. It's as if I remembered that wasn't true. It's like, wow, it's just. And I believe that the actual first time was a statement before the one about sex, but I remember the same thing happened with sex. I remember happening again, being like, yeah, that just, and they talked about past lives, and God's like, you've all had many past lives, like that's a thing. And I went, yeah, of course. It was like this, yeah, of course, as if the way I had been, even though I was on autopilot and on default in childhood, it was like I'd been holding myself up on a ledge, and I just sort of whooshed, let myself. It's like I came down into the natural place.
Surrender.
It's easier to be somewhere in the place after the realization than it was before, even though I was totally unaware before. So by definition, you kind of assume that's effortless, and in a way it is, but actually there's a more natural place.
It's really interesting because I know as you talk about it, because I can feel it, I can receive it, I can access it, that there is a deep level of energy shift that took place in that moment too, because it's not just an intellectual piece.
Yes.
And as you describe it and talk about it, which is how most people, well, I'm not going to say most people, that's not a fair assessment. Many high performers who've learned to operate in intellectual narratives will lean to that way of processing first, right? I'll think about my thinking for a second that allows me to then think about my feeling and realize that there's a shift in what's taking place. I felt the energy shift that was taking place, but for those that might not have experienced it in the same way I did, can you give the contrast to what you experienced energetically, emotionally, and spiritually as well as that intellectual shift? Because, again, transformation doesn't happen intellectually.
100%.
It happens with integration, and when it's happening with our cells and the 40,000 cells in our hearts that are brain-like cells, that if we don't feel the history of our past, we cannot actually transform through it. It's been scientifically proven. So give us the elements below the head.
Yeah, it's interesting. And it's possibly because I'm processing it through memory. Because there was it was the shift from the blankness into awareness. We might call that activation on an energy level. What is activation? It's kind of just a lot of your system at once popping into consciousness, meaning you are currently aware of something that a second earlier you were not aware of.
Yeah.
And so there's this stepping into self. It was the template, the way I'd always lived, the things I'd always assumed to be true suddenly shifted like an earthquake. And suddenly your
awareness though, because you accepted it too.
I did.
right? It wasn't just awareness, because awareness doesn't actually embody the change. The acceptance and ownership through it does. And that's what you're describing, is what I'm hearing.
I mean, the acceptance...
Because the awareness, now you're accepting a new truth.
I'm accepting a new truth. Yes. The whole paradigm shifted, and I just, because of that remembering feeling, that's what's really coming back really strongly. Yeah. Yes. Because it's like, oh, it's like you woke up from a dream and you forgot you were dreaming. It's like, oh, of course, you don't have a hard time, mostly, accepting the awakened world, because you remember that you went to sleep, and it was almost like that. Like, yes, of course, I forgot that's how it was.
Right. And I think that's so beautiful for you to be able to articulate that, because that is so what happens, right? Is that we get stuck in our bodies. We might be raised from an awareness standpoint to something, but until we accept it and embody it, again, it doesn't change.
Yeah.
And so often the awareness makes people more aware of all the ways they should be judging themselves, but yet at a very natural ability, you allowed yourself to accept it because of your connection to your higher self, the history and connection of multiple truths that you were experiencing real time. And that is transformation, is literally, that's how they describe a paradigm shift, which is what you said in the beginning. It's like, nope, my entire reality and truth takes 180 degrees or even a 365 degree view, but it just allowed us to see every other angle simultaneously, so we see the truth around us real time. The way you described that's beautiful. And so thank you for unpacking that, because that's what I think is so accessible for people, is everyone's experienced that in a moment, regardless of the depth in which they've experienced.
Yes.
And so that's one of the things you do very, very well, is help other people access that. And as an intuitive and an empath, you're also filtering multiple different energies.
Yes.
So help me understand, how do you help others access that by using your energy, your experience, and your wisdom? And we'll talk more about certain things and how you do that later. But in this particular example, how do you hold the space for somebody energetically through a transformation?
So holding space, the phrase holding space just means being present.
No.
Actually present. Not here waiting for the end of your sentence or here thinking about something else, but actually being here. That is holding. One automatically holds space by simply being. Space is beingness.
So beautiful.
And it's so interesting because I suppose not the only gift, but probably the most significant, is the fact that I can feel when people are moving away from what they want. I can feel self-sabotage. I can hear it in the voice. So as you speak, you're in a session, you're talking about your your relationship with your daughter, lovely. And then at some point you say something and I can hear the soul speak. And then that's where I go, okay, pause right there. And we go down into the body. Because as you said, it needs to be felt, right? Life, and why does it need to be felt? What is the difference between that and intellectual? Because feelings actually exist. Effects of thoughts exist. The thoughts don't really. It's a happening, but it's not. I use none of it. Interestingly, I use no mind, no thought, no intellectual anything in my work. I don't find it's necessary. I agree. Go past the whole thing. Go straight to the much more direct.
Completely. I agree completely.
So I think that is the process. Is there's a way in which we're all creating what we want. I mean, we're all creating what we have in our life, right? Some of that's great. Some of that sucks. If you take that as truth, then the only problem any human has is that they're not aware of how they're creating the things they don't want.
I love listening to you talk.
That's it. That's the only problem. Because by definition, if you knew how you were fucking shit up, you'd fix it, right?
Yeah.
So by definition, it's like everything can be so simple. Actually.
What are you unaware of today?
What am I unaware of today? It's a beautiful invitation. Thank you. I have been experiencing a bit of a spiral, right? It's things that feel circular, right? Sort of like, oh, I already dealt with this issue. Yeah. I've come back again, but you're not. It's actually a spiral because you're actually in a very different place, but you are re-experiencing. So I did that for a long time. Yeah. It really does. Yeah. But if you look closely, you'll notice you're handling it differently. That tends to be the shift. So for quite some time, and the personal development people are probably going to hate this. For a certain amount of time, I felt like I was finished. When I hit the enlightenment period. Truly. Because what issues? And I don't mean what issues for a few days or a few weeks. This was for a year and a half. And then I came a little bit out of it for a while. And then I went back in for about 6 months. And so from that place, there's nowhere to go. You simply are. Life simply is. You are perfection. I don't need to fix you. I can show you how if you come to me. But I mean, it's like my vibration got so high, so radiant, so bright that truly my clients, you should have seen my clients. I mean, they would just come into my like presence and I could see them already starting to transform.
Yeah. I understand that, by the way. I completely understand that.
That was super cool. So if the question is, what am I not aware of? There are ways in which, because I don't exactly know where I was, truth be told. I don't think I was in the same place as like an ascended master. I don't think I was quite there, but I was in some version of that. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, it's a gradient. We're all in some version of that. But if we sort of speak a little carelessly here, I could certainly, I would hear people. I think I heard Byron Katie answer a question once. They said, what would you do if people didn't want you to teach anymore? And she said, I would sit down on a curb and bliss out. And I remember listening to that and being like, shit, I want to be able to do that. That sounds fucking great. I could do that. I did that on the regular. Yeah. Oh, I'm waiting for my appointment. I have 20 minutes. Okay, I'll sit there and I was just blissful. It was just, and then I came out of it. And here, because you were talking to me before we started recording, and all he did, folks, this will teach you, was ask me how I've been. Well, serves you right. Here comes the answer.
Because I need to know in that moment too. Yeah, and I was like, okay, we're talking about this somewhere.
He's like, cool. Before you go into all the good shit you're about to, is it cool if I record? Fuck. I need less famous friends. So it's very interesting because I'm learning now about that period. And that period was probably about maybe a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. And I'm like, still in really, like, as humans go, I'm still in the, as far as happiness and joy and like health and ease, I'm still in probably the top like couple percent. Like I'm doing really well. But of course now my level of comparison.
There's no doubt about that, by the way.
I check in sometimes because I'm like, all right, like I've let go of all attachment, really, to my life.
Beautiful.
I have no say in what happened. Like I now know it was so educational. Like now I'm feeling this huge wave of gratitude, and that is new, and I'll explain that in just a minute. But because I have been a little resentful. Oh, truth be told, because I came out, I lost it. Hear the air quotes, listeners. I lost it. I was in a thing. I had something. I did not have anything. And then I lost that thing. I never lost anything. Right. And so there was this, but that was how it felt. I saw it in this way. Right. Yeah. And I held on to the resentment. And I didn't even really know it. It was just, it's like if your awareness is like a balloon, it was like just on the other side of like the layer of the balloon. Right. It's like now I look back and I'm like, yep, it was just outside my awareness, but I couldn't quite see it. It would dip in and out of my awareness. I'm like, boy, I feel some resentment about that. But I was holding on to it. I really was for 2 years. I mean, that's a little bit of a rookie thing if you think about it. Holding on to something for a long time is something that you do before you've mastered, letting go. So it's fascinating. So I kind of back to some fucking building blocks. Yeah. Which honestly is great for me because even and this has just turned around in the last couple of weeks, actually. So this is a really powerful time to talk about this. So I had this incredible experience. Even when I was there were a few moments of ego.
Yep.
Oh,
I know.
So if we're talking, so let's say my ego used to just be, it was just massive. It couldn't even fit through the door ahead of me. And superiority was one of my preferred defenses because it keeps you a little bit separate and a little bit better than and above it all. And then you don't have to be down in the mess of human soup of actually connecting with yourself or others. So
it's so easy, right? Except
oh my gosh.
Not. It's fucking horrible.
Yeah, it was great. I loved it. I loved it up until I realized how much it was fucking me over. And then I was like, okay, never mind.
You look great. I'm actually like garbage inside. Why?
Why don't I have any friends? Don't they know how great I am?
Yeah.
So I would have a moment like the place itself is sheer beingness. There is no, and this is genuinely the truth, there is no better than. More evolved is not better than less evolved. It's not a thing.
It's not a thing. I agree.
Really important for listeners to know this.
1000% agree. God, I cannot emphasize that even more.
Our heads are bobbing really hard.
Not about where anybody else is. It's where you are. Period.
Yeah. And that's the truth. That's not just like, now get out of your head. Like, that's the actual objective truth, right? You're not better. I've been through a lot of stuff. I'm not even better within me. That's not the better is not, that indicates there was something wrong before, which means you've misconstrued the lesson. Like, you genuinely don't understand. And there are a lot of layers to this. This is a great example of a spiral. I keep coming back to this one. So anyway, I would notice, I'd say I'd be there with like clients or with somebody who's like at a lower level of evolution, and I would be just there and everything was great, fine. And then I would have like a thought of like, I can't remember. I think maybe like once I remember, having this sort of realization of like, at some point you'll be where I am. Now we're in comparison. What do you mean where I am? Where the fuck do you think you are? Right. And so there was the little ego came in. And so I'm learning, I'm realizing, because I've been confused this whole time. This is so brand new, you guys. This is just this transformation has happened within about a week. I've been resentful because I didn't understand why I was pulled out. Do you even know this language? I caught it right as it was coming out of my mouth. As I was pulled out, so now I'm a victim. Now there's an out to come out. You see all these little things, right?
You're the observant participant real time. That's one of the reasons I love talking with you, because that's what I try to teach people to do, is to be in minutes and moments, but be in the presence. And you do that so beautifully. Even the second it came out, you're like, nope, that's not real, right? Like it just, the authenticity. So I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I had to call attention to that, because people, like, this is possible for you to be so aware of yourself in the moment that you catch yourself, so you're always living in congruence. Dominey's showing this right now while she's discussing trouble and struggle.
This is the hardest time I've had in 2 years. This is like the quote low of the last 2 years. That's why I say, like, even though I'm kind of out of the enlightenment thing, it's like, but still, like, it's pretty good, actually. So I realized that. So a couple of things have happened, this transformation. So I started feeling kind of badly, maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago. I've been nomadic for the last 2 years, by the way. And like, in case nomadic sounds really cool, it is actually. I mean, it's very cool, but like, it wasn't exactly voluntary. Like, I've been homeless. That's the real term. Meaning I would have liked to have had a home, but I wasn't called anywhere. I couldn't seem to stay anywhere. I've been sort of kept nomadic. And so I've moved to Europe. I'm now in Zurich. I've been in Monaco for the last year. Before that, I was literally van lifing. I was driving around in my car around the US. And so during that time, and so there was some resentment about that, because I was like, I want a home. Why am I feeling a longing for a home? Why do I feel that desire if it's not being provided for me? Because to me, with the way the universe works, that's not a thing. Either you're blocking it, or it's not really what you want, right? Or, there's some sort of distortion. It didn't seem to be making any sense. So I started having a little bit of a hard time. And then it sort of came to a head. I had a session with my healer that was super powerful. And afterwards, I realized the full realization of this resentment came in. Of course, feeling the resentment keeps me out of that place anyway. And it totally shifted. And it shifted from, well, I guess I better let that go, which is not what letting go actually sounds like, to the actual letting go and turning back and looking at it and being like, oh my God, I can't believe that happened. I had an experience a lot of humans will never have. That's extraordinary. I'm so grateful that I got to experience that. So there was this full letting go of my attachment and my sadness and my grief around losing. I can feel it now in my body around what felt like loss. Again, the word losing comes out, right? Around losing my connection to that place. And with that gratitude, with that actual letting go and shift, my vibration started going back up again.
Yeah.
And I've realized also that the reason I, quote, was pulled out of it, I wasn't pulled out of it, I couldn't sustain it any longer.
Yeah.
that maxed me out. That's what those little moments of like ego or superiority is like. That was as much as I can sustain, right? You've probably had this, right? You break a belief and you reach a new level. And it's like, sometimes you kind of crash down and you go back up again, but it's like, and so that's what's been shifting for me lately.
So amazing. I deeply, deeply resonate with that, actually. Those who've kind of followed our path 6 to 9 months ago, we literally burned everything to the ground or brought it to a complete fucking halt and didn't restart it or shifted it 180 degrees in everything in our business and our life and the rebuild moment that kind of comes with all those things. And, I want to go back to something you said, because I think this is also something that I know I personally really struggled with. It was this concept of better than, right, and above, and the realization and acceptance that like we really are all the same. But I'm curious because I know that I struggled with shame on both sides for me, which was I'm not worthy and I'm not good enough, which I didn't live in very long. But it was on the other side often when I showed up in the arena and I was ready to go to battle. It's who the fuck do you think you are, right? Like who are you to live so big, right? And it was never from a place of ego or better than. But what's also interesting is the balance and dynamic all of that. How do you integrate the belief around you're not better than while still allowing yourself the ownership to know that you are more of an authority when it comes to certain things and the way that your experience and situations and wisdom have gleaned your gifts than other people might be, right? Like I can say confidently that I am one of the best in the world at what I do. Mm-hmm. There's no question about that. And that doesn't mean that I actually am better than anybody or that I'm more evolved than anybody. It's just my happenstance of patterns that put me into a position where I just so happen to be able to channel the messages that aren't even mine, but allow wisdom to flow through me and have that happen, right? But I really struggled as well with really being able to own all of the big parts of me and all of the parts where I actually am an authority and can guide and can be counsel for so many, right? Because I'm not an authority in more ways than I am, to be perfectly honest, right? And so I'm really curious, how have you integrated that with yourself, this concept of not being better than, but still having complete ownership for your unique power, purpose, mission, and strength that exists and is true because you're more advanced in certain ways or have access to certain things that other people don't today, whether or not they have the capacity to.
Right. Well, they're two separate things, actually. So one is a skill set that's around authority, teaching, learning. There's a hierarchy implied in that simply because a teacher holds authority. So we sort of see that as above. Maybe unpack that or not.
There's a lot there.
Right? As a whole thing. But there's also there's a value statement. A value statement is subjective. That doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
Right? Sadhguru, who's how I was thinking of when I was speaking of, he's a very well-known enlightened being. He's not better than I am in any way, shape, or form. He is more evolved than I am.
Bingo.
And you are actually more evolved than your clients because that is the skill set. Like how you choose to teach it is up to you. I don't even know how you teach it, to be perfectly honest. That's never my concern because my concern is your level of evolution. Mm-hmm. That's why we were drawn to each other. Mm-hmm. Because you can only teach another to the level of evolution which you have reached.
Agree.
Right? So Sadhguru can teach me, which doesn't mean, we can also say things like, oh, there's like wisdom in children, right? They say a simple statement, you go, oh, wow, it's not like nobody can provide insight. What's really the invitation here, listener, is to become aware of and suspicious of how you place things as far as quality and value. So a lot of the work that I do, I also burned my life to the ground a couple of years ago, including my niche. I was a single man. I was a dating coach for single men. Same thing. How are you holding yourself back from what you want? How do we fix it? Did that for years, very successful, loved it. Then I began to feel drawn toward high performers. And now I'm really drawn toward people who have a lot of possessions, traditional success, wealth, but they feel like shit.
Yeah, we target the same people.
Oh, we're talking the same people, right? So what we genuinely do, if you look at what we're actually doing, regardless of what we say we're doing, we're shifting their value They think their value is the yachts and the cars and the accomplishments and the achievements because they're performance focused, and they've done that since they were young. 2, I have value just fucking cuz. And so it's always about like that's the one change that we really consistently make, because all of the other issues that they come to us for are solved from that one shift. So it's very important, the value. I'm not better than my clients. I am more evolved than my clients, and I have a skill set that they don't have. I'm better at this than they are. Even if somebody's really evolved higher than I am, I might still be better at this one skill.
Correct.
Yeah. So it's kind of a different. It's two different levels.
Again, I asked because I figured you'd put really in simple structure to the difference between the two, because they aren't the same, but they can feel the same for people, similar to how the patterns are. And so again, I'm trying to elevate to consciousness the fact that it actually is relatively simple to start to distinguish between both, and they are not mutually exclusive. Like sometimes they are interdependent, sometimes they do stand alone, and that's just the reality. But I'll call attention because we had a guest not long ago who was sitting in my chair in my office and literally came from poverty, abuse, trauma, millionaire by 22, worth $250 million today at 44. Okay. And so I asked him, I said, hey, you've been at the darkest of dark, the poorest of poor, more poverty, lack of resources, food, housing, all of the above. You experienced it in a toxic, abusive environment, right? You were born into that. And now you live in a world that most people say they want, but honestly can't even begin to imagine what $250 million actually looks. And what does that do in their life? And does that even actually matter based on who they have to live their life, right? But I basically said, what's the difference in the human experience? And he essentially said, nothing. Right. And the beauty and the simplicity in that is exactly what you even just said. And that's what we so often are helping people connect with. Now, though my one-to-one work is typically with people of that profile, right? We do stuff to support people at mass levels because of where we're going and the impact we want. One of the things that's just so true, and I believe in so much of life, is that everything really is an energy. I didn't always believe it that way. I didn't feel it that way. I didn't think it that way. I didn't experience it that way until I got to a place of awareness and acceptance and surrender in my own life to really see how everything flows. I have deep fascination for connection with energy that's even beyond the human body, right? And you spent 25 years riding horses competitive.
Yeah.
And that is a massive energy. They are powerful. Yet our small bodies are able to energetically connect with these beings and guide them. Can you talk about your experience on a horse and like what is the best feeling you get when you're near them, and how has that energy been an influence in your life?
So in year 1 of the Barbara Brennan School of Healing, which is the 4-year healing school that I went to, intensive, digging into your shit for 4 years. It was brilliant. There's a skill where, so within the human energy field, the aura, there are different frequencies, different vibrations. There's 7 different like levels. This is how I was taught anyway. 7 different levels, meaning frequency, right? Like the way an electron goes around a nucleus, right? If you eject enough energy, it sort of hops out to a larger, there's no, it's not a gradient. It's like you inject this energy and it sort of pops out if it's enough to a larger, a larger space. And so in this way, there's sort of these different frequencies, and it teaches you how to go to each one intentionally. So if you have a client come in, you could do all of this. So you go to certain chakras, and you also go to the corresponding layer of your field. And one of them is the 6th layer with the third eye. And it's quite a high vibration. And
it is.
I can't even remember exactly. It's hard to hold, actually. Yes, you have to build a container for it. Yes. And so I can't remember exactly how I was having a hard time going to it. This is year 1 of the school. And a teacher came over and we started talking, and somehow we came across horseback riding. Yeah. And maybe they said something as simple as like, what do you like most about horseback riding or something? And I was a show jumper. And I liked the high fences. So the higher the better, big, wide, Grand Prix looking things. I just loved it. My state is changing like as I'm talking about it. And I realized that there was a moment when the horse takes off. So I come up, you're planning it out. You see your distance 6 strides out. You're turning, you measure your distance where the horse is going to take off. And then there's this moment where they sort of rear back a little bit and launch. And as I thought about this moment in that classroom, I jumped to 6th level and stayed there. And she goes, "That's it right there." And so there was something about jumping a big fuck off horses. There's like little light ones too, but I like the big, like powerful ones. I was the same way with motorcycles. I'm less about speed and more about power. I find that and depth. See, you were coming on being like, "I'm about depth," and I'm like, "Yeah, bitch, right here." The light and flow. It's just not my style. Even speed, it's not really my thing. But that power, right, of just launching, and my whole field just like lit up. And so there's really there is something incredible about it. I'm sure it's how I learned telepathy. I learned animal communication also when I was young. My mom and I went and did like these courses to learn animal communication. And
my wife, by the way, has a natural ability to communicate with animals. It's
really
ridiculous. Yeah.
It's phenomenal. It's such a fun thing to learn.
I could give you 10 stories of where she saved like a wild bunny and they like just melt in her arms and feel completely safe and don't react in any way that they would to any other human. Like, it's nuts. So I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but I completely understand. My wife, we always chilled. Like, we told our kids always, we're like, "Mom speaks dog," just so you know. So like, she has an ability that most of us don't have to communicate.
It's such a great thing too, because oftentimes, because kids can do this too. This is, by the way, telepathy is not like a magical gift. Being psychic is not a magical gift. Neither is energy healing. All of this stuff. This is all learned. Because what'll usually happen is the kid will come in and the dog Molly's on the ground.
Real quick, I have to pause you just for a second.
Please.
I think there are some people who have natural energies when they're born into this world that have greater access to it from a natural ability, at least in this capacity as a human body. I agree that it's been learned and conditioned through time, and I agree that it's a learned trait, and I want to unpack that in a second, but there are people who are born with a natural, empathetic, intuitive ability, and you can see it even as kids. And so I'd be curious to see the difference, and that will come back to that conversation, but I think it's a combo of both. I think there is some natural heightened tendencies that people have, and then there's significant intentional training and conditioning that anybody can access to get. That's what I believe. So I didn't mean to derail your thought. We can come back, but
no, that's fine.
Obviously, I got triggered there. I was like, "Fuck no!" Like, no, I didn't pay this shit.
Shut this shit down.
and so, like, we obviously, I'll unpack where my feelings come from that in a second. But finish your train of thought, please.
No, I was literally going to say that this is the way it happens when you're talking about with your kids, because the kid will come in and say, "Oh, Mom, the dog's stomach hurts," and then Mom goes, "Oh, how do you know? And she goes, "Oh, she told me." And then the mom goes, "Oh, honey, dogs can't speak." And so the kid goes, "Oh, really?" And then they shut it down.
Exactly.
Yeah. So and your statement is correct, but it's parallel to mine. So what you're saying is that some people have a natural gift.
Yes.
Oh, of course. I'm great at speaking on stage. That scares the shit out of most of the population.
Yep.
But I was doing it when I was 3. Mom, watch this. I've got something to express. Right. So I have a natural gift in that area, but the statement was around the nature of psychic skills. Psychic skills are something which can be learned by any person. It's a universal ability. And then it's more easy and more inclined for some people.
That's all I was clarifying, because I do believe in gifts. I do believe people are born with certain things that
100%.
The starting point, that if they lean into those gifts, they can only be amplified. But it is something I believe every single person can.
100%.
So that's what I really wanted to support. So, thank you for that.
Yeah. Even when it gets to the very top too. Sadhguru was talking about Sadhguru. Sadhguru loves to go fast. That's like his thing. He wants to ride motorcycles, or he drives cars. Something he loves the thing of speed. Like he's enlightened. There's no like ego in that.
Yeah.
I have no need for that. Even in my enlightened place, I gravitate toward power, toward depth. So you can see how
even power. I'm drawn to both, man. I don't know. It's
great. You need more than one motorcycle.
I also know, because of my story, that's the truth. Like I need multiple modes of transportation to allow me to fulfill different speed elements. because I don't need to go fast always, but I also fucking love to go fast. But I also love just like raw power, right? And there's something to be said about like even American muscle cars compared to modern day, like, you know, supercars, right? Like there's just a different rawness to the power of a muscle car, even though they are nowhere near as fast or as capable or as powerful as today's modern supercars with all the technology. So it's just a different, and again, it comes back to vibration and frequency, right? My favorite vehicle to drive, I have a 1981 CJ5. Doesn't have a top. It has, I have a custom family style roll cage to keep my kids safe in the back seat, because those things are roll monsters, and I would never let them in the back seat until that was there. And then I had a custom bimini top, like from a guy who makes boat biminis, Tom, and he made this custom top for the Jeep. But literally, it's my favorite vehicle to drive because I feel the vehicle.
Yes.
It's a 4-speed with a granny gear, right? Like it's a manual transmission in a 1981 Jeep that was rugged, no luxuries. Like, you know, if I go faster than 60, 65, I'm going to get the Jeep wobble. It's going to be fucking scary as shit, but I don't need to go faster in that car because it's about the ride and the experience. But we also have a Tesla, and I love to fucking floor that and have complete electric access to power and be 0 to 60 in 2.5 seconds. Like
the exact same way. I learned to drive on a 91 F-150 with a gun rack in the back, and now I have a Tesla as well. And I love both those, but I totally agree with what you're saying. It's like the especially the manual, you're feeling like you're experiencing the machine. Like there's a oneness there, the manualness. Interestingly, I love that. I love the sci-fi electric shit. In between, I wasn't super inspired.
Yeah.
I'm like, my car is a computer. I can't really control it. Perfectly honest, if it breaks down, there's nothing I can do about it because it's not, there's no wrench here. You know, there's nothing I can do. And so it kind of felt like I lost it. And now it's gone so far to futuristic that it's like, I'm in a fucking spaceship, so I'll take this.
Yeah. It's interesting. For me, it's interesting because I really genuinely in my life have like felt in many cases, and I don't feel this way anymore, though my rush threshold still exists this way. It's almost like I had to be on the bitter edge of life or death, rather, to feel alive. Right? Like my experience, which you and I have talked a little bit about, right? Put my sensory self in such a heightened state of fight or flight, of like my nervous system being wrecked, that the only way, after I also blocked off and shut off feeling, to feel alive in some cases was to be near death. Right? Which is why my mom would get calls always about me getting injured or doing shit, because I just always like pushed the limit. Now, I've obviously conditioned that differently, but it is interesting because whether it's speed or power, what I really was seeking this entire time was connection. Right? And there's so many levels of what I didn't understand about that. And even when you go back to that moment when the horse is starting to bridge and lift, and you know what you're describing in that moment is deep connection with yourself, with this energy and being that is operating as an extension of you, with the universe and how it's all flowing around you. And you know, it's interesting because I've coached people that operate in business as entrepreneurs where they're just blocked, they're riddled by fear, they have this negative energy, but they rode horses for 20 years. And I'm like, okay, you jumped competitively. If you got scared before you did that 6-step leap, what would the horse do?
Yeah.
The horse isn't operating independently of you in that situation. They are connected to you, right? No different than when they say you grip the club too tight on a golf club. Like when we are in restriction and not in surrender, right? It literally restricts everything we want. I believe that freedom is one of the things that we all want. And I think freedom really does come through the deepest levels of connection, right? And in so many other ways. But I also have this belief that though we all want it, I think most people are actually afraid to stand in freedom. I'm curious your perspective on it.
Do you know what's interesting? You know what came up for me when you said that, when you're like, I believe that everybody wants freedom. What are your thoughts? And I wonder if you've had clients who are in this, of people who seek to be, say, tied up.
Oh, yeah.
Seek to experience, right? These fetishes of not, specifically of restrict me, restrain me, keep me from being able to.
I think it's interesting because I do think that there is this belief pattern, and I know that it existed in me, and it does for a lot of high performers, right? I think so many of us learn to receive love, validation, and connection through performance. And so as a result of the conditioning that exists there, I think that there isn't an understanding of a modeled way to intellectually and even energetically feel what it looks like to not be in full restriction. Until we get there and start to shed the layers and can understand that we can access it. But, I always talk about how for years, though I was unconscious to it, I had conditioned myself to believe that I deserved all the pain. That if it wasn't painful, it wasn't meaningful. That if it wasn't painful, that we weren't going to get growth. And I have a deep belief in embracing pain to avoid suffering. I just think pain is a very interesting thing. I go deep on pain. I do believe people need to lead into it and understand it and all of those aspects. But I think my ingrained unconscious belief system is that I deserved to have to literally crawl up the fucking mountain, scraping my hands and knees on the way up with a saddlebag on my back to weigh me down. And while I'm walking past ropes and ladders and escalators and elevators that would put me right at the fucking top of the mountain if I just was willing to step on or believed that was going to be the way. But I always was like, no, if I don't fucking do it the hard way, it's not going to be meaningful. I'm not going to have the appreciation. I'm not going to have the connection. And so I literally lived in restriction in an unconscious way because it was also the belief that I always had that I was being tested, which is also victim mentality. And everybody's always like, oh, you got your heart ripped off early and you never made yourself a victim. Fuck, yes, I did. It just had nothing to do with my arm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? It had nothing to do with my arm. I mean, it also had everything to do with my arm. And so that's what I'm just curious about is it's that's what I experience is people just need to understand what a moment of freedom can feel like. And I think we can facilitate that through the connection that we create with our client. Because when someone can feel safe and protected and seen and understood and deeply connected, maybe potentially for the first time in their entire life,
100%.
That was at a soul and cellular level, which you and I both have the ability to do. People often are like, shit, I don't even know I'm telling you this right. I don't even know why I'm processing this right now. Holy fuck, I don't know why I just released this trauma from 70 years ago in my life because I didn't even know that it was affecting me in this way until I was in your presence. And that's where it comes full circle too, because that's part of the authority that I now know I can own is my presence is the most powerful thing, whether it's virtual in a room or anywhere that I can be. And clearly you believe that. When did that understanding, acceptance, realization, and embodiment happen for you in your life? Because yes, you had these awakenings at early ages, but you also so beautifully articulated that there's still layers that you're accessing and going through.
It was piece by piece, leaf after leaf after leaf. And there's a couple of things that brought me to it. One is I'm super growth oriented. I'm inclined that way. You're inclined towards speed and power. I'm inclined toward power. I'm inclined toward growth. The other piece that may be more accessible to our listeners is it hurt.
Yeah.
I kept going because life fucking hurt. That drove me. And once I realized, and this is grace, I realized it fucking early that there was something that could fix it. And that's, I think, as I'm building a global healing empire. And really, the underlying mission statement of this empire is, I want you to know that everything you struggle with is fixable.
Really?
What you do from there, none of my damn business. I don't care if you fix it. I don't care if my clients fix it. I'll tell them that straight up. Doesn't matter to me. This is your life. But I'm going to show you how. And chances are, if you invested with me, then you're ready to go. But that doesn't matter.
I always tell people if they don't have the desire or the courage to stand in their truth, they're not ready to work with me.
Yeah.
Because that's the only thing to reflect back is the truth. And that's exactly what you do as well. I'm really curious. What is your biggest problem in life today?
I think that what I shared earlier, I mean, that's the most difficult thing I've gone through since since being in that very, very high vibration place. Problems are not very big anymore. They're sort of little, small, like,
So regardless of how you view big in the perspective of big and small, like I love that you just created that.
Yeah.
There is still a hierarchy of perceived resistance, problems, challenges that show up. So even if they're all small to you, what is the biggest challenge or problem that you're facing today?
It's interesting, and it keeps coming up not quite as clear an answer as it could be, because I don't view things as problems very much anymore.
Okay.
And I genuinely don't. Not like bullshitting myself anymore. I don't, because, for example, growing my business, right? We were talking before, I'm my gift ends right around marketing. That's not something that I'm meant to do in this life. And yet I have what I feel is an incredible gift that I want to spread out. And so there is continuously this little bit, there's like tension. Well, sometimes little, sometimes it's quite big, between my desire to speak, on more of a global stage, and my kind of inability to walk the steps between here and there. And I've been solopreneur for quite some time. I've had teams in the past, and now I'm actually feeling this place of like, I'm not supposed to do that anymore. Like it's stepping out of my gift to now do that. And so I would say that I have periods of impatience where I want to be further ahead than I am. What does that even mean? Where am I going? So you see, very quickly, because I have been the truth, not seen it, not learned it, not been aware of it, but become it. I am aware that there is in fact nowhere that I'm going. It's not like a mindset trick. It was for a long time, that helped. And then I stepped fully into it to where it's like, no, really though. Further ahead on what path? As at some point I let go of my path. I even let go of my identity as a healer, because that's an identity and that's bullshit. I'm not always a healer. Sometimes I sit on a chair and do nothing. Who am I then? Who would I be if I were not a healer? That was the question I had to answer, because even and this was only a few years ago, that was like one of the last things that really came down for me.
Question to answer, though.
It was a powerful question. Well, whoever you think you are, who would you be without that? I'm nice, I'm giving, I'm successful, I'm powerful, I'm a big deal, I'm terrible. Cool. Who would you be without? And then sit in it. Be it. Because that's actually the truth. It's you without the template. We're talking about the template that shifted when I was 14. And so I will have those sort of waves. And when that wave comes up, that's me not tolerating the present. I am where I am in business. For only a few years in, it's pretty fucking good. What does that even mean? It means I'm thrilled about it.
That's right.
Right? So there's no, like, without the context. So there's, I really live in that. And I would say the impatience is probably the thing that comes through the cracks the most successfully, that still kind of hooks me sometimes.
I deeply identify with everything you just said, and I really appreciate how you answered that question. I'm feeling a very strong call in this current moment to ask you something very specific, and I want to give a caveat before I do. Because this is in zero way self-promotion, but this is absolutely selfish because I know the gift that you are. I would be really curious how you read my energy.
What's the intention in asking?
I just respect your lens, and it's always interesting to get reflections.
You want me to reflect now?
Yeah. I've got nothing to hide. So if you're willing to go here on the show, it even shows people what you do.
Yeah, why not? So tell me about something, either about you or that's happening in your life. Doesn't really particularly matter what it is, whatever occurs to you in the moment.
I had the highest level of congruence I've ever experienced in my life a week and a half ago, almost 2 weeks ago now. It was absolute perfection and beauty, but also riddled with all of my own patterns, armor, hesitations leading into it. And so through the concept of surrender, like, I just have to say I'm really proud for how it showed up. But let me give you context. I was speaking at a buddy's event that was going to be in Arizona. So he's a buddy of mine. He's in my backyard and I can go pour into his room. I'm going to, right? Like that's what I have the opportunity to do. And so I did. And my wife came the first day for a little while, and it was beautiful. Whenever my wife can be just in the room with me, like her presence is all the protection I ever need, ever. If I needed it outside of myself, right?
So can I pause you?
Yeah.
Do you feel the shift that happened when you started talking about your wife?
I didn't. I mean, I feel the depth of my wife, and I feel the depth of how I talk about my wife. And so I guess that's so normal for me that it wasn't a conscious shift, because it's just my existence.
Yeah. Do you want to finish your story, or shall I reflect?
Yeah, let me give you, if you can, let me give you this as a context, because I think this is important. So we're going into this room, and my son has autism. He has sensory processing disorder. He has generalized anxiety disorder. He's neurologically wired different, right? And he has executive functioning and impulse control challenges sometimes that we've really had to learn how to embrace and give him that safety and space. And also for us to realize we don't give a fuck what anybody else outside of our family thinks if he has these moments in public, that we just need to help him through. Easy, right? But I have this old condition, which is like so many parents, which is when you go out in public and your kid has a fit, right? The immediate reaction, especially when it's the first time it happens for many, is like, right? And so like, I'm heading into the room in an activity that I get paid for, living and existing in my gift. My wife has been in those spaces and rooms with me. My kids never have been, even though they've watched a lot. And so what I didn't know, though I guess I could have and did ultimately, was the level of depth and congruence and safety by their energy being held in that room, because they were holding space for me. And it was really cool because I noticed a bit of this hesitation, and I just kept breathing through it. I have Trust Surrender Breathe tattooed on my left arm because there's a whole lot I constantly have to do to put myself in the minutes and moments, because it's one moment, one breath at a time in my life, right? And so we get through this, and my kids start participating, and they are raising their hand, and they're getting the microphone the next day. And then we get to do hot seat coaching. I did hot seat coaching, which was one of my favorite things to do, because you can have transference in a room, because everybody can experience and feel the depth of what's happening. And people resonate with it. They feel permission, they get acknowledgement, they get understanding and words to articulate situations they wouldn't have otherwise. The first one was extremely powerful, and I won't go into detail on the story, but it was ultimately a young woman who's been successful, who a few months ago went through a suicidal period and almost took her own life, and tried to open up to her parents, and they haven't talked to her since. Okay. So ultimately in that moment, I said, yeah, you were going to take your life. And she said, yeah. And I said, but you didn't. And she said, yeah. And I said, and you're still here. And she said, yeah. And there was 50 people in the room, and my son was the one that started clapping. Like, just deep connection. And then the next person got on the seat, and he actually had his arm around me. He was actually testing me a little bit. He didn't want me to get through, even though he really wanted the work. And so I had to change my cadence and do some pattern interrupts. And fortunately, there was this moment that I felt, because I asked him a question, and I felt the energy connection when he looked up and saw my daughter, and my daughter said something. I don't remember the words she said, but it was powerful, and it was in the whole room. The whole room heard it, right? And so I said, all right, Blake Addison, come up here. And they stood next to him. We asked permission if they could hold his hands, and they said no. He said, no, I need a minute. And I said, cool. My kids never pushed that. We asked again when he stood up and he was ready to do what he did, and he said he didn't acknowledge it. So my kids I didn't even have to say anything to them. They just knew. And they stood next to him, and they held the space. And he's on this moment where you can tell, the breakthrough moments that happen. The armor's there, and then all of a sudden it's like you just have to get them right through that moment. And it was one of those moments, and the power of the room was helping him do it. But what broke is my daughter said, come on, man, you got this. Right next to him. And he broke into tears and said something deeply profound. And so what's been really relevant for me is that we've been working so hard to create congruence in our life in every. And the fact that my kids were an extension of us, but they were uniquely them. And they showed up in that space at 7 and 9 in really complex discussions that we've already communicated with them in depth about. So they were fully ready, prepared, present, conscious. And they both went up to each person afterwards independently. We never asked them to do this. We didn't even know they did it until afterwards. Each one of them went up and gave commentary on what they experienced while they were up there, and how brave they were for sharing, and how much they helped other people, and just existed. And so, honestly, that was probably it might be the most proud moment I've ever had as a husband and father.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. There's a way in which, the parts that you're conscious of, I'll skip because you're conscious of them, and your level of self-awareness is very high. The places where there's an element of your field which has some roughness to it. Part of that is your core, your style, and part of it is some leftover stylings, almost. There's a way in which your the bottleneck, or the place where your system is really working harder than it needs to. That's what it feels like. The what was coming through for you as you were speaking is that the next level for you is one of more ease.
Okay.
Right? Not just ease in your life as far as doing things, but in your way of being. Mm-hmm. I see this a lot, actually. People will evolve to a really high level, and on the other side of that little, barrier, it's like, when you I don't know if you've ever like flown on a plane, right? And if you're watching the screen in front of you on the channel that shows the flight, it'll show you the speed of the plane. Mm-hmm. And the plane's going whatever, 100, 200, miles per hour, and then it leaves the ground. And as soon as it leaves the ground, it's like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7,000. Right? It's going like way, way, way faster. It's that type of thing where there's a massive rise that is on the other side of this little barrier or bottleneck. And the bottleneck is around there's a working harder than you need to, and there's a little bit of an attachment to the process because you're very skilled in that. You spend a lot of time with your clients in this, the how that it happens, and you're very skilled. You're very comfortable in that realm. However, that realm allowing your focus to be there and on sort of the underneath the barrier is what's making you work harder than you need to achieve the same result.
That is highly congruent with things that I'm conscious and unconscious to. I would tell you, here's the really interesting part. I was at my mom and dad's house on Sunday for dinner. My wife and kids were out of town. And I don't know if I've talked to you much about the physical pain that I've dealt with for a long time, and lots of deep injuries, lots of trauma in my body. And I've been on a healing journey in my body at a cellular level with really guided intention with my consciousness meditation and a lot of external things that I've also done. It varies. It doesn't ever stop me, but I literally in many years have operated at a 7, 8, or 9 on the pain scale out of 10 while I'm having to live and operate an everyday life, right? Which is a significant drain in capacity, right? And, all of these pieces that can tap my system. What I'm proud to say, though, and I believe I know exactly where it's coming from, and ironically, it has a lot to do with all of the patterns of what have existed. But my dad said, "How's your pain been?" And I was conscious to this. I've been very carefully watching it. And at that moment, it had been a week since I'd had any physical pain in my body. And I'm sitting here now almost a week later, and I still have 0 physical pain in my body.
How very interesting.
And so it resonates deeply. Now, I also been tracking my aura scans, my biorhythms, my sleep patterns with my meditation and consciousness coach, who's just brilliant. For about 9 months, we do a morning check-in. And she's literally interpreting and reading a combination of gene keys and my biorhythms, and she's got a Healy aura coil that can actually read aura scans from afar. And so every single morning we're getting downloads, both on my conscious and unconscious pieces, my dream download, because she interprets dreams, and the data that we're getting from my vibration frequency, where my life path is and everything. And now after 9 months, the calibration of those downloads every morning is insane. And what I would tell you is that is what I have experienced in the last 6 weeks, is a consistent progression in that liftoff, as you will, actually experiencing, embodying and existing in complete ease, regardless of what's happening through, in, or around me. And it's a level of freedom and connection that I've never experienced. And what's also interesting is the energy build that I actually sense of things coming into our world actively is insane, because that was also one of my biggest blocks, is that I didn't used to be able to ask for help, and I've had a struggle often being able to receive. And so we've been working through karmic factors, multi-generational pieces on a daily download perspective, which, by the way, I want to be really clear, doesn't mean that I know it all, see it all, or anything. What I love and what I want to reflect back to everyone is Dominey, in a matter of 5 minutes, was able to hold space for me, was able to, with a very high degree of accuracy, with a deep level of work that I actually am conscious and still have levels of unconsciousness too, but I was conscious to lots of what she shared, even though I didn't communicate it in my story, because of the depth of work that's also possible. And why I'm highlighting this is that's after years of consistent focus, conversations, intentionality with myself, 3.5 years working with this one individual, daily calibrations, and in 5 minutes, you saw truth. Okay? And I just really want everyone who's listening to recognize that. That's an ability I know I have and I deploy, but it's the reason I asked you is because I had a sense that it was going to be spot fucking on. And you and I've not had that dialogue before. And so thank you for being willing to go there. Thank you for investing your energy and space to reflect back to me, and for demonstrating that what you do is really just who you are, Dominey. And thank you for that.
Thank you for that reflection. I appreciate that. Yeah, you can see even in what you described, the microcosm, right? Everything's a microcosm of greater. So as you're talking about, you're like, every morning I'm doing all these things. It's like so much work.
Yeah, but it actually doesn't take that much time or energy, especially once you're in rhythm with it.
No, and there's nothing wrong with it either. It's like that has worked until now, and it sounds like things are accelerating. And what I would say is at least with what's coming to me is I imagine that's going to shift soon.
Yeah,
because the way you are,
I don't perceive it as work anymore.
No.
So like when you say that, that's what's interesting is for me, what's really been beautiful is because it's a combination of my own consciousness and meditation work, which I typically do in the morning anyway. It's like a really interesting just confirmation and challenge of consciousness. And so it's not like an active receiving and then I put it into work. It's truly like a real-time reflection, which I have learned the power of, because that's what I do in my own anyway every morning, is download to where I need to focus and how I need to be today.
Great. Good.
Okay, so basically what I had said is I don't perceive it as work anymore, because what I've been putting myself into a position to do every morning now for years is to sit quiet enough to actually receive and download, which all it does is allow me to see very clearly where and how I exist today. And so what's been beautiful about the other data points is that it really is zero work, but it is an extension of a download that I was already doing. And it's confirmation for what I'm ultimately seeing. Not that I need that, but it also opens me to see unconscious elements that I'm not aware of yet. And I don't do anything with most of it.
Right.
I receive it and I just allow it to be what it is. I also don't judge the response in the morning. I don't look at it for one way or another, but I will tell you that on mornings that I have a lower energy and frequency, it often will actually show that through what's happening in my aura and with what's going on with me unconsciously in terms of what I'm processing. And so I appreciate the challenge on even viewing that as work. I do. And I'm receiving. By the way, I'm all for having more ease in my life in every single way. And so that's what I'm consistently trying to open myself to. So I receive all of what you said.
Yeah, because work, I'm using work in like a really advanced, very, very subtle layer, right? I have to meet you at your level of evolution. Your level of evolution is very high. So it's beyond that. Things which no one would really ever call work. A slight push, or it almost seems like just like a little roughness on the ground, like you're going over a small amount of gravel.
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to like a brand new road, right? Or like marble or something. It's so sort of subtle. And
there is one thing, and I will own this fully, completely. There is one thing that I'm very conscious to that has a historical pattern in belief that looks and feels like resistance. That's not. And I'm actively reconciling.
Can you say more about that?
Yeah, my relationship with money. Like, it's just the truth. I mean, part of what we unpacked and reflected in so much of what happened in the last 6 months is the fact that I still didn't have enough belief in my ability, my current state in life, who I am, how I show up, to build and scale a business that is completely around me helping other people. So I had 3 ancillary businesses that supported and created residual income, but also patted my ego of telling me that I was a multiple business owner on the tail end of building and scaling and selling my buy, sell, and $15 million organization that I helped build from 250 million up, right? Like, The reality of it is there was so many elements and patterns that were connected to it. And I've had so much abundance of money in my life, even when I wasn't in a position to know how to receive. But I will also tell you that the last couple of years kicked me in the fucking nuts in the best of ways, right? But it went from a place of like, oh yeah, we've got a really, really, really long runway to how we operate, to, oh shit, we made a fuck ton of mistakes that cost a lot of money. We had emotional and financial extortion in places in our life that I didn't have a healthy enough existence to have a boundary on or communicate around. All of these things that are true, and I say with no shame or blame, there's just acceptance for the process. Yeah. And so what happened? I told you
it's a really powerful learning, by the way, just the way you brought that out. Like, yep, this thing happened and that got fucked up. It's like, I just want the listener to realize the sheer, like, you're standing in it with both feet. Like, there's no tentative.
Completely.
Like,
so here's the reality. Most people still look at me and assume that I don't need any help. Right? That we have more money than we know what to do with, that we've got financial freedom and security for everything that we do, that, oh man, he's helping so many people. Like, clearly, like, everything is going well, right? And I want to just be really clear. Like, I fucked up a lot in the last couple of years. I also made massive levels of impact, and we produced impressive levels of revenue. But here's also what happened. I was completely out of congruence in additional ways. I was carrying weight for business partners and certain entities that were out of alignment with our original agreement, and holding on to it because of what I was attached to and what it said about me and my identity, and what would it look like if I, 2 years into 2 businesses that were already 6 figures, now all of a sudden I'm shutting them down. Am I a failure, right? Like, all of that I had to just compress into a moment once I saw it. Because I didn't see all that until literally July and August, and then it compressed into a moment, and everything changed in that moment. And so, right, what do? We burned everything to the ground. We did it very intentionally. We wrapped up things in a right legal way. We ended relationships with grace, with empathy. We did things with absolute ethics, and we approached stuff absolutely congruent to who we are, but we also had to rebuild everything. Right? We shifted all of our language, all of our marketing, all of our shows, literally, when I say everything came to a complete screeching halt, other than I was helping people, everything else changed. And so, right, like, so what does that mean? The first part of this year, we had less active revenue coming in the business than I had on a recurring monthly basis in my first year in business 8 years ago.
Wow.
Right? We had twice last year positions where I was concerned I wasn't going to make cash flow or payroll because cash flow was so tight. Right? All the while I'm pouring into and investing in other people. But you know what was lacking in my life? My clear understanding of the value that I offered at every single fucking moment just because of my presence, and the fact that my boundaries exist just because of my existence. I was allowing the extortion to take place because it was still what I was blind to, right? Ego was padding it, but it also was self-preservation and protection, because if I can insulate with all this other shit, right, then I don't really have to test whether or not I'm good enough to go actually do this as a standalone deal.
That's also
I just want to say, I'll close it because this is literally the last thought.
This is great.
That's literally the real-time resistance.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm in a paradigm where I have more things moving in our world, more impact happening, more flow, more energy, more congruence, less pain in every single way. but less revenue coming into my world than I've ever had. And by the way, that's a emotional, energetic mind fuck of existence. Because again, I actually don't believe anything that my body is telling me in terms of the reasons at any level. And I don't mean that intellectually. I mean that in my soul. I don't believe it, but it has not worked itself out in terms of like the energy that still pops up. And what's cool is the energy pops up and it's minutes and moments now because I can sit with it, breathe through it, reconcile what I know is true in the moment and surrender. Because genuinely, Dominey, like I tell you that the first part of this year was the lowest revenue we've ever had. But I also know without a doubt, we are like on the brink of explosion because of everything that's happening. And what we've been building was also something that got tested because part of last July and August is we had a reel go to 7.2 million views on Instagram. And it broke our business. We weren't ready to scale. We had 10,000 people come into our life through social media in a course of a week. We didn't have the capacity. We didn't have the systems. We didn't have the processes to even come close to serving even a fraction of that population because the overwhelm was so real because the clarity in how we were guiding and supporting wasn't. So we were creating our own resistance, but like that broke everything. That wasn't the only thing that happened in July and awareness that brought this to it, but that's what I'm very cognizant of. I'm still on a gravel bike waiting to get back on the road with my relationship with money because money is just like everything else. It's an energy, it's currency, which also is a current that flows. And the less I attach to anything from an outcome perspective and the more I focus on presence, and ironically, the more I pour into my family, the more everything in our world grows.
The journey toward ease.
You were going to say something that you were reflecting back, and I told you I wanted to finish that. So if it's still there in present relevant, jump in and please finish that because I know I felt where it was going and it was real.
Yeah. I was supporting what you were saying because you pointed out a microcosm. You said it shifted when I shifted the value into simply being, right? We always hear, just be yourself, just simply be, Thing is, the amount of ease that comes with, I'm just going to show up.
It's unreal.
It's unreal.
That's
so beautiful. That was because you talked about it earlier. You're like, I need to leap towards that. And I was like, there it is. I was just going to point it out for the listeners.
So again, I'm very conscious to where it exists in my world.
Yeah.
And I'm very conscious to how I'm moving through it. And, that's what I also appreciate even in the way that you talked about everything. That's what I would tell you more than anything is to exist in ease. It's actually to realize that everything around you, even the inside you in moments, can seem or feel chaotic, but you can still be centered, grounded, calm, clear, and like just so connected in the midst of all of that chaos.
Yes.
And that's the ultimate paradigm shift is when you realize like that's everything.
That's everything though. Yes. I have in one of my programs called The Art of Authenticity, I have a module that's called The Art of Invincible Happiness.
That's a beautiful even title.
And that's it. It's like now my happiness is invincible to you. You could be like, this is the worst fucking interview I've ever done in my entire life and I'm throwing it out. I can't even believe I had you on, such a waste of time. And I'd be like, I'd be surprised because that's not how you've been, thus far, but it would not impact my happiness. It has nothing to do with you.
Exactly.
I had a teacher in school who used to say that. He would say, my loving you has nothing to do with you.
Bingo. And it's also not on their terms.
So there are no terms. It just is. It's how I'm being. That's choosing to show up in this moment in a way of someone who loves you. How you respond is actually irrelevant.
Thank you for loving me. And thank you for demonstrating that in the way that you showed up. Do you have any closing thoughts that you'd like to leave people with? And how can people find you? Because I want people to be able to find you and tap into your gift and existence. And though you and I target a lot of the same people, and though we have very similar gifts, you will help people that I will never help and vice versa. And you will land and resonate with people that I will never help and vice versa. And to me, it's always about the collective impact. So I want my world to know who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially with, people who who align with you. This is my favorite thing about our industry is it's impossible to have any competition because I just have a different vibe. You know, come to me, it's a slightly different experience than coming to you. You know, you get slightly different things. Great.
And by the way, I believe every coach has a season too. So keep going. The best way to get a hold of you, and what's your closing thought?
Yeah. So the best way to find me is just my my website, which is my full name, DomineyDrew.com. And if you send me, can I offer something actually for your listeners?
Go for it, please.
If you send me a message on my website and mention this podcast, or just put Brian or something like that, I have a free program it's actually a lot of material. It's like I made it into like an 8-week course, but it's something that I just like to give away because it's like enough to create transformation just kind of on your own. And so I will send that to you.
Clarity. Have them send you a message on your site that says flip in the lid, because when you flip in the lid, you're going to open it up and give it to them.
Yes, I love it. Perfect. Yeah. So I will send that over. It's a really useful thing. I want, as far as a lasting thought, it's important to me for people to know that everything that they struggle with is fixable. Why? Because struggle is fixable. Here we go. The chaos. What is the difference between being stressed out by chaos that surrounds you and sitting peacefully amongst the chaos that surrounds you? It's where you're attached. If you're attached to the chaos, you're the end of the bullwhip and you're getting whipped around and you're getting whiplash and it hurts and it's chaotic and you can't get your feet on the ground. If you're connected to yourself and detached from the chaos, you can still engage with it, but if your connection is strong within, then you sit peacefully with your inner state invincible. And whatever happens in the outside world, you can pleasantly greet because your happiness does not depend on it. Incredibly powerful transformation that can be done in an instant.
Thank you so much for being here with us today, my friend.
It's been my honor. Thank you so much for the invitation.
You're welcome. And for all of you who just tuned in, it's rooted in surrender. It's rooted in acceptance. It's rooted in you actually being able to sit in those moments as the observer and participant in your life and recognize that, again, just like we teach, that the trash in your past is not your fault. It only becomes your responsibility once you become aware of it or you start burying others in your trash. It's about the ownership and the awareness that shifts you into a place of embodiment to exist in exactly who you want to be. And the ultimate level of freedom and connection that's created with your ability to see yourself clearly is the only way to get there. It always comes back to the capital word truth. Don't forget to flip your lid. Again, you can.
What you can probably tell by now is that I love telling these stories, but what I love even more is the impact that's coming from them. You see, we're on a mission to impact over 1 billion lives as quickly as possible, but to do that, we need you. See, we believe that moved people move people. And so all I'm asking is if you've resonated, connected with any of the messaging, please consider commenting, sharing, leave a rating and review. Thank you so much for tuning into Flipping the Lid. And if you want more information on the show, how to become a guest, how to recommend a guest, or any of the other details, head over to flippingthelid.com. We'll see you there.